These Bible animations prove ancient predictions came true. For centuries, the Bible has been called a book of faith, but what if it's also a book of history, written in advance? What if the animated stories you grew up with are more than just tales? What if they hold the key to unlocking prophecies written thousands of years ago? We found animated Bible scenes that show shocking connections to ancient predictions and their fulfillment. Over the next few minutes, we'll show you how these animations highlight a pattern so precise, some believe it has shaped the very course of human history. We're counting down 5 of the most compelling examples, where ancient words painted a picture that was only brought to life centuries later. Section 1. The Prophecy of the Virgin Birth. Our first prophecy comes from the book of Isaiah, written over 700 years before Jesus was born. In chapter 7 verse 14, the prophet gives a sign, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." For the writers of the New Testament, this was a clear prediction of the birth of Jesus. The Gospel of Matthew, in particular, quotes this exact verse to describe the miraculous conception of Jesus by the Virgin Mary. Animated scenes of the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary bring this ancient text to life, visually connecting the 700-year-old prophecy with the nativity story. But this is where it gets complicated. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah is Alma, which simply means young woman. The specific Hebrew word for a virgin is Betula, so case closed. Not quite. Something fascinating happened in the centuries between the original writing and Jesus' birth. When Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, a version called the Septuagint, they chose the Greek word Parthenos to translate Alma, and Parthenos does mean virgin. It was this Greek translation, widely used in Jesus' time, that the gospel writer Matthew was quoting. For him and for early Christians, that choice wasn't an accident, it was a divine fingerprint. While many modern scholars argue Isaiah's prophecy originally referred to an event in his own time, early believers saw it as the first piece of the puzzle, a specific prediction about how the Messiah would enter the world. Section 2. The Prophecy of Bethlehem. Next up, a prophecy that zooms in on one tiny village on the map. The prophet Micah, also writing around 700 BC, made a startling prediction about Israel's future ruler. In Micah chapter 5 verse 2, he wrote, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel." This prophecy said the Messiah would come not from a grand capital, but from the humble town of Bethlehem. Fast forward 7 centuries, and the Gospels of Matthew and Luke record Jesus' birth in that very town. Animated stories vividly depict Mary and Joseph's journey, their arrival in a packed Bethlehem, and the famous nativity scene. These animations directly link the event of Jesus' birth with Micah's ancient words. Now there's a historical puzzle here. The Gospels say a Roman census forced the couple to travel to Bethlehem, but the details of that census, one requiring travel to an ancestral town, aren't backed up by other Roman records. Because of these historical discrepancies, many historians question if the Bethlehem birth story is a literal account. Matthew and Luke are our only sources connecting Jesus' birth to that specific town. Still, for the gospel writers and Christian tradition, the narrative is powerful. The circumstances, whether by census or something else, led Mary and Joseph to the exact location foretold. For believers, this isn't a coincidence, but proof that a divine plan was unfolding, placing the Messiah in the precise little town prophesied centuries before he was born. Section 3. The Prophecy of the King on a Donkey. Our third prophecy is about the Messiah's grand entrance into Jerusalem. Around 500 years before Jesus, the prophet Zechariah painted a picture of a triumphant yet humble king. In Zechariah 9:9 he wrote, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Stetter dein, istepper doan verdan, bistepper dein." See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey. In the ancient world, a king on a war horse meant conflict. A king on a donkey, however, was a symbol of peace. Zechariah was predicting a king who would arrive in peace. All 4 Gospels describe the triumphal entry where this scene plays out. Animations show Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey as crowds shout, "Hosanna!" creating a living, breathing version of Zechariah's words. The Gospel of Matthew even says, "This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet." The New Testament writers saw this as a deliberate symbolic act by Jesus, declaring his identity in the exact way it was foretold. Of course, since we don't have non-biblical sources for this event, some scholars suggest the Gospel writers may have shaped the story to perfectly match Zechariah's prophecy. But, for the early Christians, the connection was undeniable. The animations we see today capture the power of that moment, a king arriving not with an army, but with a message of peace, matching a blueprint laid out 5 centuries earlier. Section 4. The Prophecy of the Suffering Servant. The fourth prophecy is one of the most hauntingly specific in the entire Old Testament. It's found in Isaiah chapter 53, written around 700 BC, and it describes a figure known as the suffering servant. Isaiah 53 says the servant would be despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering. It continues, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities, and by his wounds we are healed." The chapter goes on to describe the servant's unjust trial, his silence before his accusers, and his death alongside criminals. Christian tradition has long seen this as a stunningly detailed prophecy of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The description of being pierced is seen as a reference to the nails and spear, and while the central event is a matter of faith, we do have the Roman historian Tacitus and the Jewish historian Josephus independently confirming that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Of course, this is a specifically Christian interpretation. Jewish tradition has largely understood the suffering servant not as an individual, but as a metaphor for the nation of Israel, suffering in exile. Even so, for believers, the parallels between Isaiah 53 and the final days of Jesus are too specific to ignore. The idea that this story of immense suffering was pre-written in such detail is seen as one of the most profound proofs of Jesus' mission, a story of purposeful sacrifice. Section 5. The Prophecy of the Resurrection. Our final and most critical prophecy is the cornerstone of Christianity itself, the resurrection. The apostles argued that even this was foretold in the Hebrew Scriptures. In the book of Acts, both Peter and Paul point to Psalm 16 verse 10, written by King David around 1000 BC, which reads, "Because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay." Peter argued that King David, who died and was buried, couldn't have been talking about himself. His body did see decay. Peter claimed David was speaking as a prophet about the Messiah. The prophecy meant God's Holy One would die, but his body wouldn't corrupt because he would be raised back to life. Animated stories powerfully capture this climax, the sorrow of the crucifixion, the finality of the tomb, and then the shocking reversal, the empty tomb and the risen Christ. Let's be clear, unlike the crucifixion, the resurrection is not a historically provable event. Most historians view it as a claim of faith, a theological belief, rather than something verifiable by historical methods. Its evidence lies in the accounts of Jesus' followers in the New Testament. For believers, the empty tomb is the ultimate proof that validates all other prophecies. It's the final, most powerful piece of the puzzle, suggesting a story written not just in advance, but for eternity. So, what do we make of all this? We've walked through 5 ancient prophecies that, for believers, map out the life, death, and resurrection of one person. A birth in Bethlehem, an entry on a donkey, a story of suffering, and a promise of victory over the grave. Whether you see these connections as historical interpretation, clever storytelling, or divine proof, the pattern itself is undeniable. The New Testament writers were convinced they were watching these ancient texts come to life, and, for 2,000 years, billions have agreed. These animations do more than just retell old tales. They visualize a series of predictions that, for many, prove history was indeed written in advance. What do you think? Are these connections proof of a divine plan, or are there other explanations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this journey through ancient prophecies sparked your curiosity, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Share this with someone who loves history, a good mystery, and an even better story. Until next time, keep asking questions.